In the whipping, I'm whipping the soul out it. Chin the tone when I'm festing like Pilates. Why you frontin', you act like you somebody. Keep a trail in the ville, how I go by it. I was stuck in the rut, I was nobody. I've been looking for something to go body. There's an art to the hustle like yo got it. Kid got a kick back and here like a new shotty. In the whipping, I'm whipping the soul out it. Chin the tone when I'm
Yo, what is going on, Titan Clan? It is your boy King Titan X here, back with another video. And this video, you guys already seen the title, you guys have seen the thumbnail. It is going to be What If Deku Was Beast Boy. Alright, so one of the very first things I should really clarify, like besides the fact that I got like some help from Purple Heart Neptune as usual. It's mainly always going to be like for the MHA stuff nowadays. That and Data Live, if you ever see that on my channel. Alright, so basically with that out of the way, what I really wanted to get into was how Izuku was born here, really, because I'm going to be turning Beast Boy's abilities into a quirk in this version of events, just to make it easier. Now, Izuku in this version of events would have been born with green skin. Inko wouldn't have really questioned it all that much because, well, she just assumed it was probably part of a latent quirk he had. She wasn't able to really predict what sort of quirk he would have though. Hisashi would have been a bit curious about this though, and trying to question the doctors about this. They would have also explained that, well, it was probably just because of a latent quirk that Izuku had. After all, it was rare but not unheard of for kids to have awakened quirks that happen at like such an early age, even at birth sometimes. And Hisashi would have shrugged it off. After all, the kid still did have his eyes and his mother's hair, so he supposed it was okay. By the age of 4 years old, Izuku would have actually had a pretty normal life. I mean, sure, some people would have commented on his green skin, but others would have found it to be kind of cool. Izuku would have been reading an animal book one day, just looking through one of those picture books that many kids would have looked through when they were around the ages of 2 to 6 years old, just barely learning how to read at that point. And when Izuku came across a penguin, he just found so much joy in looking at them that he actually turned into one. This was the first time Izuku really awakened his quirk, when his mother stepped into the room and saw that there was a green penguin in her son's place. She kind of freaked out. Hisashi was also wondering what was the deal, and when he saw this he almost fainted because of the fact that there was a green penguin in their room. I'm pretty sure many people would have just lost it seeing that. That's just so unusual, but some people would have also been there. Well, Izuku actually would have said that, hey, here's the thing. Hey, Mom, Dad, I'm still here. They would have looked at Izuku in his new form and realized that, well, he is green. Our son does have green skin, and this penguin is green, and we could have sworn that we just heard our son's voice coming from that penguin. So they would have immediately took him to the quirk doctor and gotten his quirk evaluated. Next thing you know, after an hour or two of getting the quirk evaluated, Izuku would have come out to the doctor's office in his regular form, his human state. And the doctor, I'm not going to say that it is Dr. Ujiko here, I'm going to say that it's a random doctor, to be honest. But this doctor, they would have simply stated that Izuku seemed to have a transformation quirk of the sorts. This transformation quirk basically allowed them to turn into all sorts of animals so long as he knew what they looked like. He remembered telling Izuku to try and turn into a lion, but at that time, Izuku did not necessarily know what a lion looked like. So he would have actually pulled up a picture of a lion to see if that would have any effect, and sure enough, Izuku would have ended up turning into a lion. Baby lion for right now, but still a lion. And the doctor would have been pretty interested in this quirk of Izuku's, saying that Izuku's quirk held a lot of potential. Over the years, people would also see that his quirk had a lot of potential. After all, being able to turn into a large variety of animals, seemingly an endless amount, really had its perks. People would even begin to dub his quirk as pretty much the ultimate transformation quirk. You have such a large array of transformations. All you really need to know is what the animal you wish to turn into looks like, their strengths, weaknesses, all that can be learned along the way. You just need to know what the animal looks like, their name. That's pretty much the only requirements for such a quirk like Izuku's. It's kind of ridiculous, so really the only thing that was stopping Izuku was knowledge, so that's why he would have been studying up on his quirk throughout the years. He would have constantly been looking in picture books, probably watching some of those safari channels as well, just writing down notes on all of these different animals to look up about later on the internet and write down even more notes, trying to figure out just how they really are, how they operate, what are their strengths, their weaknesses, and so that he would be able to use these in combat as well for whenever he becomes a hero. Izuku would have been a bit of a class clown, but he still was pretty smart. Despite having a really strong and versatile quirk, alongside the fact that he was also rather intelligent, Izuku would not have actually gotten a swollen head over the years. He was more of an attention seeker than anything. But even then, it was just because of the fact that he was kind of used to making people laugh and entertaining people. He just wanted to put a smile on many people's faces over the years, and people would enjoy that. He would have been a much more likable character than Bakugo to many people's eyes. The fact that he was intelligent also made it so that the teachers didn't necessarily hate him either, although he would sometimes distract the class. Granted, he would help some of his buddies when it came on to something like geography, something that he pretty much excelled at considering all the studying he did about animals. So of course, it would eventually reach on to their geography, basically the places that they lived in over the years. Word would actually spread about Izuku's quirk though. Throughout these 10 years, people would begin to hype up Izuku's quirk, once again calling it the ultimate transformation quirk, the most versatile quirk, honestly. The most versatile transformation quirk. You know, all of these different sort of names people would have for their quirk. Izuku would end up becoming the talk of the town eventually. Bakugo would be pretty well known as well, but not to as great of an extent as Izuku. Bakugo would have been known for having an explosive personality, not necessarily his quirk though. He would have also been known for being one of the strongest kids in their grade level, or even the whole of Aldera Middle School. Or was it junior high? Whatever. It would even spread to some heroes who would kind of be interested in Izuku though. They would have some interest, but when they found out that he was still in middle school, not necessarily a high school student or an up and coming hero or sidekick, they wouldn't have been too interested in trying to stick their neck out for the kid, because while he surely did have potential, they could wait a couple years at best to actually gain an audience with him, or the other way around. After all, they still had a lot more else to do, a lot more important things to do in the very end. Honestly, the attention that Izuku was getting, news would fly all the way up to even the top heroes like All Might and Endeavor, but they would have still been focusing on their own things at the end of the day rather than trying to actively seek them out. If they met Izuku, then they would meet him. Nothing really all that different for them. And just some talk to the town for a week or so, but it was whatever in their books. Izuku would have not necessarily been the best of friends with Bakugo, or even friends at all in this version of events. Bakugo would have seen that Izuku was a bit of a worthy rival for him, but at the same time, Izuku and the way he acted, he saw that Izuku wasn't really worth his time. He would just focus on himself and improving his quirk. Izuku could continue to be the class clown, while Bakugo would have been striving to become the #1 hero, while everyone in Bakugo's group would have still been amazed by his quirk. Everyone would be amazed by Bakugo's quirk, it's just that more attention would be focused onto Izuku. They would just simply exist in this version of events. That's basically how those 10 years would go. These two just focus on themselves. Bakugo would not have necessarily been as much of a bully here, simply because of the fact that he knew that there was somebody to really challenge his authority. He knew that Izuku, if he really tried, could be something great one day, but Bakugo still believed that he was better at the end of the day. It's just that he could not afford to slouch when it came on to Izuku. He knew that if he were to ever become lazy or anything along those lines, Izuku would be quick to usurp him. He was not going to allow that to happen anytime soon, so that's why Bakugo would have probably ended up being stronger in this version of events. Now we can actually reach into the more canon events, you could say. Basically, the start of the series. The teacher would have ended up walking in to announce that 2 students from their class were going to be trying out for UA. They would have mentioned how a lot of students wanted to become heroes, but these 2 especially would be very interesting prospects for UA. And everyone, once hearing that 2 students were going to be trying out for UA, 2 students from their class, they already knew who they were. Izuku, Midoriya, and Bakugo Katsuki. Katsuki Bakugo. It depends on how you guys really prefer say say it. Bakugo, well, he wouldn't really do anything here since he knew that fighting Izuku would be a waste of time and energy. After all, he did see Izuku turn into a dinosaur at one point, so he knew that Izuku could probably be rather destructive and grow a thick hide if he really needed to. So he decided not to really try and embarrass himself here, rather to just focus and try and, well, become as strong as possible in order to defeat those dinosaur forms of Izuku one day. This would probably be tested during the sports festival for UA or something, because Bakugo already believed that he was going to be a shoo-in for UA at this point. Izuku would have just ended up walking home after those events with the teacher in the class. He would have been walking home until the sewer lid started to make some sounds, some very sudden and very quick sounds you could say, until a large sludge villain appeared, knocking off the, well, sewer lid. He would have mentioned wanting to take over Izuku's body, but Izuku would have immediately tried to do the race. He would have tried to do the dash against the, well, sludge villain. He would have ended up turning into a small rat and escape into the sewers. All Might would show up a little later on and actually deal with the villain. He would have noticed a green rat run into the sewers, but he wouldn't find it to be all that important. He would have just assumed that this was the doing of a couple of punks who would basically try and spray paint over some animals from time to time, thinking that that was a new trend or something. Just some hooligans doing some naughty stuff. So All Might wouldn't really try and get an audience with the rat. That's all he really knew at the time. He would not know about Izuku actually transforming into the rat. He never actually saw Izuku turn into the rat, so he would just leave. Izuku wouldn't bother trying to catch All Might here, since he knew that he could actually be a hero, especially with how he already had a super strong quake here. This quake, you guys already know all the details about it. So during these 10 months of training, Izuku would just be studying even more about more animals all throughout history, transforming into all of these guys. There was a megalodon, which was very interesting to use. After all, it was like the largest shark in history. But when it came on to like mobility and all of that, it wasn't really the best to use for most situations. Plus, it exhausted too much energy to really use for more like a minute or so. When it came on to polar bears and all that, though, they were more interesting to use on colder climates. He realized that there would have to be something for each and every animal that he used, so he would write down the benefits for these new animals that he was learning about. Now we would end up skipping all the way past these 10 months. These 10 months would have just been training for Izuku. He would have also made his way to Dagobah Beach and actually trained using his quake on these items, this junk that was on the beach as well, and end up learning more about how strong some of these animals really were. But by the end of these 10 months, Izuku would have been prepared. he would have also ended up training his physical body a little bit as well, but he would have been focusing more on, well, the other transformations. Maybe he would have also been building up stamina along those, well, during this time as well, but that was pretty much the most that Izuku really trained his physical body, besides, well, whenever he was in his animal states. So of course, when it came on to the entrance exam, Suzuku would actually pack some dental care in the form of mouthwash, floss, a toothbrush, etc. Simply because of whenever he turned into a T-Rex or most dinosaurs that were on the more carnivorous side, he would end up using his teeth a lot, and some of the gunk would actually get stuck in his teeth. So that was why he was bringing some of this dental care. Choco would have actually noticed one of these essentials poking out of his bag and be greatly confused. She would have started to think that, hey, maybe this kid is sort of like me. Maybe he's poor himself, so he has to brush his teeth or something from different areas. He probably doesn't have water at home or something. That was basically what Ochako was thinking, and she was thinking, poor thing. At least she had that. At least she had plumbing and all of that. It seemed like Izuku didn't even have that. She would have felt bad for him. Well, for that moment, until the physical portion of the entrance exam. Izuku would have immediately turned into a T-Rex and demolished several robots. Ochako would have seen this and then realized what Izuku was doing. He was biting down on quite a few of these robots, tail whipping others, and then just doing some insane stunts on these monsters. Well, these robots, I should say. And then she would connect the dots, realizing, okay. Yeah, that makes a lot more sense. Several candidates would be left in awe at Izuku's strength here. After all, they are literally seeing a green dinosaur destroying like tens of robots at a time, stacking up several points. It was practically insane for them. Even the strongest of the strong candidates weren't really stacking up as much points as Izuku. Izuku is pretty much a shoo-in for UA at this point, and some of these student candidates for UA, they would have actually been looking at Izuku with a bit of fear. After all, they are seeing however tall T-Rex is just destroying all of these robots. Of course you would be scared. He would end up turning into a gorilla at one point as well, when everybody was running away. Everybody was running away from what looked to be the 0 pointer, but Izuku had better hearing here and would have ended up hearing Ochako's cries for help, and he would have actually turned around. This is why he would end up turning into a gorilla. He would have turned into a gorilla in order to have the arms to actually lift up the rebel off of her. He would have yanked her out and just carried her from there. Izuku would have gotten around 80 points here, which would basically be Bakugo's score just by 3 points. And when it came on to how much rescue points Izuku had, it would have been 10. So Izuku would have had 70 villain points and 10 rescue points for saving Ochako from the 0 pointer. He didn't necessarily destroy the 0 points or anything along those lines, which is why he has such a smaller number here. Everything would stay pretty similar to canon after that until the Quake exams, and where Izuku would actually be the one to throw the ball here. And pardon me if I pronounce this word incorrectly, but he would turn into an Ankylosaurus and tail whip the ball into the air a good 500 meters, which, while impressive, wasn't the best score that would be shown here. I mean, there's still Bakugo, who would get like over 700 meters, Ochako, who would end up getting infinity. So Izuku pretty much was average here. He got around the middle. Not bad, but not the greatest either. Most of the other exams though, Izuku would pretty much obliterate most of the competition. He would not necessarily reach first place for most of them though. Well, except grip strength. He would have ended up actually turning into, he would have ended up actually turning into a gorilla once again and to basically beat Shoji's score just by a couple points really. They had a relatively similar grip strength while Izuku was in this form. Most of the time, that was basically how Izuku was. He wouldn't necessarily do bad. He would usually average to like the top half of the class, or like the top 1/4, you could say. So Izuku would end up making his way to a sweet 3rd place here. No one would really get expelled in this timeline just because Minato would have showed a little potential in Aizawa's eyes with the side jump test. Many would actually be terrified of Izuku's transformations though. After all, for a lot of the exams, Izuku was basically turning into dinosaurs, so it was pretty insane to see. Battle trials though, when everybody would see All Might, they would all be in awe, thinking, hey, the rumors are really true. All Might is actually going to be our teacher here. And All Might 1/2 basically had to wear their first lesson with him would be battle trials, or like basically fighting villains within closed doors, because this would actually be something that they would have to deal with later on in the years. Sure, like a lot the fights they would have seen would be outdoors, and that would have been the main stuff being captured on the news, but most fights would have actually been indoors, inside buildings. This is basically them just getting accustomed to learning how to fight like that, and also being aware of property damage as well. Everybody would have suited up in their costumes, and for simplicity's sake, we're going to say that Izuku's costume would have been Beast Boy's, that purple, black, and gray costume from the Teen Titans show, the good one, from like the early 2000s. And if you guys dare mention Teen Titans Go, you are getting nuked in the comment section. I am going to delete your comments. Now, like, we don't mess with Teen Titans Go. That's basically it. But basically what ended up happening in the battle trials is that Izuku would have ended up being paired up against Koda and Bakugo. Bakugo would have wanted to fight Izuku, but Koda wanted to see something. He would be kind of scared, but end up trying to, use his quirk on Izuku, and interestingly enough, it actually worked. Yeah, Izuku would honestly get defeated by the animal whisperer that is known as, well, Koda. Everybody would just sweat drop seeing this, be like, uh, wait, so you're saying that the guy who can turn into a literal dinosaur and gets defeated by a guy that can talk to animals? Okay. Yeah, I see how it is. That's good to know. Well, Mike would also just sweat drop at the lackluster fight, if you could even really call it that. And when it came on to Ochako versus Bakugo, you guys already know how that's going to end, so the villains would win here. So, congrats Bakugo, that's a W in your book for once. Izuku would end up hanging out with Koda a little bit more here though. They wouldn't necessarily be the best of friends just yet though. Lunch chaos would result later on. Well, actually, no. When it came on to the next day, Aizawa would have walked into the room and mentioned how everyone did. He would have mentioned Izuku's pretty lackluster fight against Koda and mentioned that, well, Koda was basically in his element here. He can't really fault Izuku for that, especially since it was like his second day and they were just now learning about how the quakes worked. There was no way that Izuku would have necessarily known that Koda's quake would have been working on him. But he would have still said for Izuku to try harder for next time. When it came on to the elections though, Koda would have actually been the one to be selected as the class rep here because of the fact that he seemed to show that he was the strongest one here. After all, he was able to take down a kid who was able to turn into literal dinosaurs. So Koda would have been a bit nervous and, well, Momo would be the vice rep as well. Nothing would change there besides that little nitpick, that little tweak, and lunch chaos would result as usual. Izuku would have looked through one of the windows, find out that it was just the reporters who broke in and turned into a velociraptor in order to shut down the madness of the students. People wouldn't have actually listened to Izuku after literally seeing a green velociraptor fly in front of them and start talking like a human. So obviously that was pretty bizarre in their eyes, even for this society. But they would actually listen and look out the window, see that it was just news press, and calm down, returning to their seats, being like, oh, I feel like a fool now. So that would have happened. Now, basically, he would have shut down the whole madness of the students. Everybody would have returned to the classroom, and people would applaud Izuku on the good work, controlling the crowds. Even Aizawa would have mentioned this, saying, "Hey, I like that. I kind of respect that, but don't use your quirk like that next time. Like, try to avoid using your quirk while at school like that, because although we do give our students permission to use their quirks, some may not be used to, well, use with quirk and be kind of scared. You don't want to necessarily scare people right now. People are literally going to maybe think that you may have been a villain as well, for all they really knew." So that's basically a bit of a lecture that Aizawa would give, but he really only half meant it. It was just something that he was forced to tell Izuku by Nezu. Honestly, it was just like him reading a card. But the next thing that would really be on everybody's minds would be the USJ, because people would have been allowed to actually wear their costumes, and they would be learning about rescue training here, or at least that's what they were supposed to be learning that day. Instead, they would actually be learning about how to fight villains. Although I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. Right now, though, they would have been on the bus ride to the USJ, and Suyu would have actually asked Izuku on the bus ride to the USJ how his quirk worked, seeing as how he basically has arguably the flashiest quirk of all the kids in Class 1A, and probably the second strongest, with Todoroki taking number one. After all, they did see what Todoroki did to that building just the other day. He literally rose the whole entire building, so they already know. They already knew who was top dog at that time. People would have asked about it, and Izuku would have explained the mechanisms, and people would have realized that, okay, this kid deserves a nerf, because all he really requires is knowledge on the animal and what they look like in order to actually transform into them. That's not necessarily going into like how he operates using the animals though. Like, yeah, he's able to use these animals pretty well, but when he's just learning about some of these guys, it takes a while for him to get used to these sort of transformations. Maybe it'll take him a couple days, a couple weeks sometimes, depending on how big or small the animal is. If it's comparable to human size, then it'll probably only take him a couple days. If it's something like a large, super large creature, something like like the megalodon, that's going to take him a couple of weeks to really learn how to operate that sort of animal. And even then, he probably wouldn't be using them as often because these guys take up more energy most of the time. The smaller animals, he has to worry about getting crushed. They're more so used for escape. That's basically how Izuku would explain his quirk. People would still believe that Izuku deserved a nerf though. And by the time they reached the USJ, everyone would be learning about the USJ. They would have been learning about, well, how the quirks could be dangerous if they were put in the wrong hands, which was why they would be learning about rescue training and how to use the quirks in order to not harm civilians. Be careful about civilians. They would have learned how to already fight villains the other day, but they would have been learning about the more caring side to the quirks. All of a sudden though, the USJ would have ended up being under attack, thanks to the likes of some villains appearing out of a large purple portal. Aizawa would have ended up getting some notification from Hiroshima, who thought that they had just brought in some mock villains at the time. But Aizawa would have turned around and immediately tell everyone to get behind him. Everyone would have ended up still getting teleported to different areas of the USJ though. And the first thing that Shigaraki would notice though is a large green whale shark. The very first thing that he would be thinking is, what the heck are you Sponge? Like, how are they able to afford this, my guy? This don't make no sense. Izuku would just swallow Shigaraki whole, alarming Kirigiri. And when it came on to the Nomu, he would actually consume that thing as well. He would not have necessarily digested them or anything, but it was one of the few times where he would be technically breaking his vegan diet ever since the age of 4. Well, not even the age of 4, more so like the age of like of 10, honestly. He would have honestly went into more of a vegan diet. He would have realized how weird it was for him to actually be eating, well, other animals. I mean, after all, he literally transforms into them on the daily, so it's technically cannibalism if you could really call it that. Like he kind of found it to be weird, so he switched to a vegan diet afterwards, and he never really broke that code until today, and even then it was for an emergency. Plus, he wasn't really eating them in the first place. He was just storing them in his mouth right now. He was just capturing them. After all that is taken care of, the students would end up being sent back to school. They would have just been reflecting on everything that just happened at the USJ, and people would actually be looking over to Izuku, seeing some of them actually seeing what Izuku had done, and even applaud him, although they were still kind of afraid of him, mentioning how he basically took down the big baddies of the USJ in one fell swoop. Izuku wouldn't have appreciated the praise and absorbed all of it, and thinking, hey, I'm getting attention, I like that. And he would just end up acting a fool right afterwards. People would have begun to actually warm up to Izuku and his antics over the next couple of weeks. The next time anything interesting would happen, though, is when Mina would actually be playing with a laser pointer, and Izuku would have actually been in the form of a cat, trying to catch the laser. She would have found this to be an entertaining activity while waiting to find out who their substitute teacher was going to be after, well, Aizawa basically got injured back at the USJ. His injuries wouldn't necessarily be as severe here, thanks to Izuku's interference, but he would have still been injured, so that's why they were thinking that they were going to be having a sub, only for Aizawa to walk in with a broken leg and two broken arms, and people would have been shocked. They would have mentioned, like, how? Like, are you still why are you still here, Aizawa? You should be resting, but Aizawa would have just waved them off, saying that heroes do not rest, and he would end up informing everyone about the sports festival. People would have been hesitant about the sports festival, though, thinking that they are just experienced fighting real villains. And Aizawa would have mentioned that, yeah, here's the thing, UA does not want to make themselves appear to be weak in front of the great audiences, so that's why they were going to be still having the sports festival, even if some other parents also had their disagreements about this. So Aizawa would end up walking over to the desk and wrap up in her sleeping bag, and then everyone would basically have those 2 weeks preparation. People would have tried to crowd around the doorways, but Izuku would have just turned into a bat and immediately left the vicinity, getting ready for his 2 weeks of preparation, his training for the, well, sports festival. And knowing that he was basically the guy to get the most points in the entrance exam. He would have also been preparing to make a speech for the sports festival. But, well, Izuku would have still ended up giving a pretty terrible speech. He could not give a speech to save his life. So people would have been kind of bummed out, and Midnight would have had to end up improving the mood. So that ended up happening, and Izuku would have basically ended up humiliating himself on live TV giving that speech. So he learned that he would have to redeem himself now, and he would immediately go back to his clownish antics by turning into an ostrich at the very beginning of the obstacle course, and just started to outrun most of his competition. Bakugo would have been livid considering the fact a literal ostrich was outpacing him. Like, Izuku could have turned into any animal. He could have turned into a cheetah, and Bakugo would have at least accepted that, being like, yeah, at least it's a cheetah. It's one of the fastest animals on the planet. But Izuku decided to turn into an ostrich. That was like, come on, bro. That's just disrespectful. So Izuku would have ended up taking the lead here. Izuku would have ended up turning into a mouse during the second part of the obstacle course and run on the wire, just to spite Bakugo, who was yelling death threats at Izuku. The third and final part of the obstacle course, Izuku would have just simply turned into a pelican, flying his way all the way to first place, while the audience would just be laughing at the absurd but effective transformations of Izuku. During the cavalry battle, Izuku would have ended up gaining first place and gaining the 10 million head point band. Ochako would have been forced to carry a stork on her back though. A green stork, I should be more specific, throughout all of the cavalry battle. The teams are pretty much the same here. It's just that Izuku is a stork, and he was carrying the headbands in his beak for majority of the battle. Everyone would have been too grossed out to try and get any of the headbands from Izuku and focus on trying to get second place. Aizawa would have mentioned how gross but effective Izuku's strategy was before he would attempt to cover his mic and then whisper over to present Mike saying, hey man, we should totally make this down as illegal for like next year, because some kids may have some ideas and not all of them may be able to turn into some storks. This is kind of a choking hazard, don't you think? President Mike would actually give him a thumbs up and actually write that down on the list for things to be against the rules for next year's sports festival. Bakugo and Todoroki would have been the few to actually still attempt to get Izuku's headband though. Izuku would have just flown around, stalling until time was up, and his team ended up securing first place. Izuku would end up facing Shinso, and he would have gotten the hint about Shinso's quirk from Ojiro, and rather than trying to actually, speak to Shinso, or at least let this guy talk and then be forced to reply only to be caught in his brainwashing ability, Izuku would have just turned into a billy goat and rammed into the Insomniac, which would have knocked the Insomniac out to the ring. Shinso would have held a grudge against Izuku after that. Shoto would have been forced to fight a green polar bear, and even when he did freeze them completely in his ice, Izuku would just turn into something like a whale for a couple minutes, just breaking the ice before turning back into a polar bear and fighting not Shinso but Shoto. It would have been a battle of endurance, but well, Izuku would have won because of the fact that Shoto was getting slower, frostbite was beginning to build up over time, and he refused to use his fire side. And that's basically how the cookie crumbles. Woohoo, that's what you get for not using your fire side, Shoto trying to hold back. Of course, Endeavor would have been greatly disappointed in Shoto, and Shoto would have been a bit colder now as well. In the hurt, you could say. He would have been even more unwilling to use his father's quirk in this canon. Now for the fight against Ida. A green koala bear would have found their way onto the blue-haired boy's face, blinding him and actually causing him to actually run out of the ring, while Izuku would just either turn into a bird or a bee, just barely escaping getting eliminated as well. When it came on to Bakugo, Izuku would have actually turned into an armadillo at first to lower Bakugo's defenses. People would have seen a lot of Izuku's transformations at this point and be kind of confused, thinking, what kind of strategy does this kid have here? Bakugo would have also been wondering what sort of game Izuku was playing here, and he would have made sure to be extra careful while approaching Izuku. But Izuku would turn into a Triceratops once Bakugo was in arm's reach. Bakugo were trying to use his explosion quirk on Izuku, but it was not going to break past that thick skin Izuku had in such a form, and Izuku would just knock Bakugo out of the ring. Izuku wouldn't have realized this before, but All For One would have actually been watching the sports festival as well after finding out that his apprentice Shigaraki actually ended up, well, being apprehended by the heroes at the USJ thanks to some kid becoming a giant whale shark and devouring him. So it was like, what? He thought Kirigiri was crazy at first, but well, he had to take that back. He kinda had to apologize to Kirigiri because now he was seeing this kid on full display now, and he would have been very interested in Izuku's transformation quirk. Izuku would have had a lot of internship offers after the sports festival. He would have been practically famous as well, but even with all of the fame, Izuku would have looked through all of his options and realized that probably one of the best heroes to go to would be this aquatic hero. He wanted to try more when it came on to his aquatic animals anyways, so it was a win in his book. Plus, he would be spending more time with another one of his classmates, Tsuyu, who had a frog mutation quirk, so it was more of a win-win in his book. He would be learning from mutation quirk. He would actually be learning from two mutation quirk users in this canon, and he would have even been a monkey dressed up in a sailor outfit for the occasion as well. The hero would have been confused seeing Izuku at first, but you know what? He had seen weirder stuff throughout his time as a hero, and once Izuku would have informed him about his identity, he would have recognized Izuku from the sports festival and simply say, "Welcome aboard." And here comes the bad part. this is when things start to take a turn for the worse here, because while Izuku was, well, interning with that one hero, and, well, Suyu was also participating. You want to know what Ida was doing? He was really trying to find the guy that ended his brother's career, also known as the Hero Killer Stain. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. Ida would have been killed here because of the fact that neither Izuku or Shoto would have arrived at the scene on time. If Izuku wasn't there, then there's no doubt that that Shoto would have been there either. It they basically went hand in hand. If you did not have Izuku, you would not have Shoto. And after hearing about what happened to, well, his friend at the time, Ida, Izuku would have felt pretty crushed, to be honest. Stain was still on the loose as well, and Izuku would have wanted to become stronger for the next set of people that he wanted to protect, his friends and family, knowing that Ida died because Izuku was not there to save him. He could have prevented Ida's death if he was only there to save him, if he was only at Hosu City. But he realized that he was only human, and the best that he could do honor honor Ida would be to continue to get stronger here. So Izuku would of course end up continuing to train his quirk. Final exams would end up happening, and Izuku would have studied as hard as possible, acing the written part of the exam, but when it came on to the physical part, Izuku would have just turned into an ant. He would have basically ended up escaping from Aizawa here. That's right, people. Izuku would have been facing up against Aizawa. He would have been in a team with Momo, Yayorozu, Bakugo, and Todoroki would have been up against All Might, and they would end up failing. Bakugo and Todoroki would have ended up failing against All Might, considering their conflicting personalities, and they would not be able to get along well that well. They would not be able to cooperate at all. Izuku and Momo would have been the exact opposite, being a perfect duo for such a circumstance. Izuku and the rest of the class would then later on find out that they would all still be going up to the mountain lodge, but it would have been a training camp, and those that failed either part of the exam would end up getting some extra lessons, which would have been a drag for most of the students, but they would just have to deal with it. And a lot of the students would have ended up fighting off against pixie bombs, dirt monsters, per usual. The whole thing with Shigaraki would not have happened here because of obvious reasons. All that would really change here is during the raid on the first, Dambi would have began to use his blue flames in order to burn everything down, and Izuku would have recognized that there was something seriously wrong. There was also some sort of sleeping gas being passed around, but midnight was nowhere in sight, so they realized that this was a work of a villain. Another villain on top of the guy with the blue fire. So Izuku would have tried to find Kota during this time, thinking, oh no, this cannot be. Especially after he found out the whole origin of Kota from Mandalay. After he literally got punched in the family jewels by Kota as well. So basically, Izuku was trying to find the little water manipulation boy, only to find that Muscular had basically already ended the little kid. Izuku would have been enraged and trying and turn into one of his strongest animals, a polar bear for that time. No, let's go with a grizzly bear here. He would have turned into a grizzly bear and tried to fight off against Muscular, only for Muscular to literally pimp slap Izuku away, because he would not have even bothered wasting his time on Izuku, seeing that Izuku was kind of weak, despite the versatility of his quirk. His quirk only gave him so much strength. It was not any sort of stockpiling quirk or something that he could really build up his strength like for other sort of quirks. It was more so that he would have to build up his versatility with each and every one of his animals, use them to the best of their capabilities. All of them had a set limit in terms of strength and speed. They all had their strengths and weaknesses, and yeah. Aizawa would have been the one to actually use his quirk against Muscular. He would have erased Muscular's quirk and easily apprehended him in the end. Zuku would have been disappointed that he was unable to protect Kota during this time, and he would have written that down as another loss on his side, another failed protection, and this time around he was just too late. If only he was there for a couple seconds earlier, he felt that he could have done something, make a difference. And at the back of his mind, he was also thinking that he was still too weak. Even if he did make it in time, what exactly would he have done? What, turn into a Tyrannosaurus Rex? I mean, sure, maybe that could have helped, but this guy Muscular really packed a punch. He had his doubts even here. He wasn't even in his joking mood as much here. Bakugo would have ended up getting captured like usual, and Izuku would have just been losing it. So many losses on his side. How could he deal with this? His only way of dealing with this would be through getting stronger, and when it came on to Bakugo, at the very least, his death was not confirmed yet. So they would end up actually making a Bakugo rescue squad. Momo would have mentioned how she ended up putting a tracking device on one into Nomu, and during this time they would have ended up getting Bakugo. They would have used that tracking device that Momo created in order to rescue Bakugo from the villains. And although they were punished for their actions, more so reprimanded, they were still glad to have Bakugo back, even if he was pretty heated. Even if he was a hothead, he was their hothead. He was still their classmate. Everyone would be preparing for the licensing exam, and they would have ended up moving into UA's dorm system as well after all this time. Considering everything that's been happening, it seemed to be the best course for them to become a dormitory system, to create a dormitory system for the UA students in order to serve as better protection for most of them. Izuku would end up developing the Werebeast form. This would have ended up being his special move, and he would end up learning more about the benefits of this form over this course of time. He would have even ended up battling against Mirio, although it would have been a quick loss against Mirio in the end. Izuku would have still ended up learning more about this quake. Well, this half form, you could say. This half form gave him the benefits of, well, being a full-on wolf, and at the same time have the benefits of a man as well. He basically had the best of both worlds. He had the agility, he had the speed, he had all of this. Although the strength wasn't at the top tier or anything, it still proved to give him a major strength boost in the end. He was going to figure out how to use his form, and Izuku would have continued to learn more about it. He would have ended up not having all that much difficulty when it came on to mobility. He would have ended up actually doing pretty well in the licensing exam, actually being one of the very first to really win the first part of the event, because as soon as the rival schools tried to do their thing on UA, Izuku would have actually ended up grabbing some of the spheres and throwing them back at their rival students. Not all of them would be able to dodge, and those that were unable to dodge, they would end up getting their targets hit, and Izuku would have gotten at least 3 of them, which was the requirement in order to pass on to the next part of the test. He would have just been in the waiting room for right now, just having a little chit chat with some of the other students from rival schools, with one of these students even being a Nasa. Izuku would have ended up greeting a Nasa, and they would have ended up striking a pretty good friendship. When the second part of the licensing exam happens, basically the requirements for this part of the exam would be to rescue injured civilians. Many of them were entrapped under rebel, and apparently when it came on to these people, they were basically people playing to be younger audiences, you could say. Basically some actors that were playing the role of injured civilians. Basically people that were always recruited for these sort of scenarios for the next generation of heroes in order for them to get their good practice in. Izuku would have done his best to rescue as many civilians as possible while trying to comfort them during this time as well. And of course he would still end up getting points deducted, but he would have still made it onto the board. He would have seen Gang Orca and his henchmen and realized that trying to fight him would not be the best course of actions right now. So he would leave the fighting on to Anasa, Todoroki, and Bakugo. And these guys would not end up, well, you know. These guys would definitely not have ended up, well, end up making it into the hero licenses. Actually, let me rephrase that. Basically, Bakugo, Todoroki, and Anasa, they would have been the few to not get their hero licenses out of their respective classes. Bakugo would honestly be kind of disappointed in himself, but accepted. There wouldn't have been a fight between Izuku and Bakugo here. Bakugo would have had to just come to terms with the fact that Izuku had pretty much surpassed him at this point, and he had no one to blame but himself. He got too confident in himself, and he did not allow himself to really continue pushing himself in order to continue to surpass Izuku. He already knew that Izuku was going to be like the largest obstacle, but he never expected Izuku to be that large of an obstacle. He always viewed people as stepping stones. He always thought that he was going to become the #1 hero, while Izuku was just meant to be his ultimate rival of the sorts that he would eventually defeat. But no, it seemed that the roles were reversed or something along those lines. He was not the main character here. Izuku would end up interning under Ryukyu's agency. He would have learned from Mirio the benefits of a full-on internship with heroes. After all, he literally did get his butt whooped by Mirio, and Mirio alone. He and his 19 other classmates. Although Todoroki and Bakugo would have actually been excluded because of the fact that they did not end up getting their hero licenses, and therefore this would have had absolutely no meaning for them besides a senseless beatdown. So, Izuku would have been much more interested now in interning under a strong hero, or any hero for that matter, or after all, he already had a strong quirk, and to hear that Mirio also had a strong quirk as well, but it was more so that he made it strong after interning at the Night Eye Agency. Izuku would have been tempted to go for the Night Eye Agency as well, but then he would end up finding out about Ryukyu's agency, and it turns out that basically Hado, Nazare Hado of the Big Three, she was basically interning under Ryukyu, so he would have been interested in interning under her instead. After all, she didn't have a creature-related quirk. Although, when it came on to her animal-related quirk, hers was more based into the mythological aspect of it. Izuku would still find benefits though, and he would end up interning under her. She would have put him on a couple of patrols, basically also teaching him more about how to handle using his larger animals in the best of situations. And then one day he would actually end up being called into Night Eye's agency. Night Eye's office alongside Ryukyu, Nijire, Ochako, who was also there, alongside Tsuyu, I believe, and many other the heroes would have also been requested to be at Night Eye's agency that day, and Night Eye would inform everybody about the details of the Shiosaikai and what they were apparently doing. What they would end up finding out here is that a little girl by the name of Eri was basically being used as a sort of lab rat for Overhaul. That was the name of the main villain. The main villain, known as Overhaul, was basically using his quirk on Eri in order to make these blood samples, or that was what Night Eye was assuming, especially with the wounds that were, not necessarily wounds, but the bandages that were on this girl's arms. He could only imagine what was underneath them. He had a feeling that was the case, that and yet also met up with one of Overhaul's goons at one point, although they were trying to buy some sort of dollhouse for the little girl. He had checked into their timeline and ended up learning a lot about what was to come, their fate and everything, so he would have felt that they had enough intel on the Shiosaikai in order to have a raid. Everyone would have been up in arms hearing about what happened to the little girl, and Izuku would have also been upset as well. He would not have necessarily blamed Mirio though, although he still would have wished that the guy did something instead of just letting the girl go, considering he had what seemed to be a permeation quake. He had described this quake as well anyways. He had described this quake as being able to phase through things, although, well, it came with the cost of him losing his sight, his ability to breathe, hearing, basically the loss of all of his senses, so he kinda had to get used to those sensations, just literally being a blank canvas whenever he used his quake. While it's an effective quake, it came with a lot of drawbacks, so he really did question, even if Mirio were to have stepped in that time, would he have really been able to make it back? Would it have really been able to solve anything? For all he knew, Mirio could have just been splattered onto the walls. But Izuku would have made a vow to himself after losing both Ida and the little boy known as Kota to villains. He vowed that this time around he wasn't going to have that happen again. Not to this little one, this little girl that was basically going through torture methods every day, all day throughout. So he decided to make a vow that he would do his best to save her. So a raid on the Shiosaikai would happen. Izuku would make quick work of the outside forces, considering the fact that he was able to turn into some of the largest animals to walk this earth. And with the help of other heroes as well, he was basically used to restrain some of these villains, and when it came on to the rest, he was able to make quick work of the weaker ones. At the very end, these guys now had more time on their hands to actually go in and follow Night Eye, rescue Eri from Overhaul. I believe his real name was forget his real name, honestly. He doesn't deserve his real name. He does not deserve to be called by his real name, to be honest. What ended up happening is that Overhaul would have been surrounded, and many of their pros would have done their best to subdue him. Mirio would have ended up being the one to really subdue Overhaul here, using his quake, One for All. Actually, he would have actually used One for All, and what was in One for All, to be more specific, he would have awakened Black Whip at this time, and actually used it to wrap around Overhaul. He would have given him the smackdown of the lifetime. He would have literally broken Overhaul's jaw and left the man unconscious. After all, he did put around 25% of One for All into that punch of his, and he knew that Overhaul was not going to be handling 25% of One for All, especially if it was coming from All Might. A 25% punch he definitely would not be able to handle. Coming from an even stronger version of One for All now, he definitely was not going to be able to handle that. It broke his jaw, and from there he was unconscious, and that would have been the end of it. He would have ended up succumbing to the effects of One For All, though. After all, he had it quick before One For All. He was not quirkless when he received One For All. He had the quirk permeation, and he ended up succumbing to the effects of One For All. Sorry, this is spoilers, but he would fall ill, bedridden for several days. They would have tried their best to heal him, but nothing was really working. Several days would turn into months, and after those good months had passed, they would have had to pull the cord. Mirio had ended up dying. It was unfortunate. A young, prospering hero. He had a lot of potential, but not even he was strong enough to really be able to handle One For All's effects on his body, the recoil of One For All for the quirked individuals of this world. It was like a tank, and it was overfilled, you could say. He was leaking too much, and his tank just broke one day. That's the best way you could really describe it. All For One would have ended up being killed as well. And what do you call it again? All For One would have ended up being killed in prison as well. This high security prison, by the request of All Might, considering the fact that One For All is no longer in anybody's hands. That means if All For One were to ever escape one day, there would be no one to really be able to handle him. Or at the very least, it would take too many pros to really take down such a nemesis, such as All For One. And a new era of heroes would have ended up arriving afterwards. The age-old powers known as One For All and All For One, they would have been gone now. That was an end of a generation. This was a new generation, a new era of heroes had arrived, and Izuku was now seen as one of the most promising heroes of his generation. Izuku would have been ready to rise up to the occasion and show that he was going to carry on the mantle of the #1 hero. He would have made sure to become the #1 hero of Japan, or at least try his very best to become the symbol of peace. He knew that he would never truly be able to fit into All Might's shoes, but he would be lying if he were to say that he wasn't going to try his very best. And that's how we will end it off, people. And if you have reached the end of the story now, you may as well subscribe if you haven't already. Maybe hit that like button as well. You can comment if you want, and yeah, maybe try sharing this video to your friends, family, and if you hated the video, share this video to your arch nemesis. Just so that it can be like the biggest, I don't even know what you would call it at that point, but yeah, just, I'm rambling at this point. Just remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Until next time, remember to join the Discord and maybe even, subscribe to Purple Heart Neptune as well. They're going to be releasing some content soon as well, so, yeah, peace.